the two key concepts that we could call shadow-like are the looking down the spiral, which again I'm going to get more into this. I'm going to go with the quick overview of it right now, where we are able to look down the spiral, where we stand on at Epoch 5, ready to leap into Epoch 6. We have authentic self, purpose fuel trying to push us up, and this is where we look down the spiral and are able to, and again I'll go into more of the details right now, it's conceptual, are able to locate the places that we transcended and did not effectively include the enduring, important structural features of that particular stage of development. And so it is very common for us to be at a postmodern, pluralistic, at least value system, and have very broken, orange, amber, traditional, mythic, literal, and power, egocentric. And when we transcend into this, or transcend this into this, it is common to not get healthy aggression. And this is something that also breeds apathy. What?
I didn't understand what you said.
We do not get the healthy aspects of aggression. Aggression means to go forward.
Yes. Okay.
Apathy means to stay where you are.
Right.
Aggression isn't a bad thing. It's only a bad thing when it's applied to doing something violent to another human being. The act of aggression is actually creative in the literal sense of the word. It's moving forward as opposed to staying flat. And healthy self-confidence, healthy aggression, healthy power are all things that needed included in the transcendence and aren't always. And through the summits, we get to look into that and see where we can improve that. And as we transcend, then as we've transcended the mythic, literal, traditional stage, and we got rid of that nasty ethnocentrism, which we should. But what's tied up in nasty ethnocentrism, closely linked, is healthy family dynamics. And a very tight familial bond. That's the good part of that stage. The bad part is the ethnocentrism that comes into it. But they're kind of two sides of a coin. And the traditional values of structure, discipline, healthy authority, healthy rules, all things needed for a human and a society to function. And we often transcend that without capturing healthy structure, healthy discipline, healthy responsibility. That's a big one, right? What do conservative Republicans preach over and over? Family values and personal responsibility, because they are sourcing their values out of here, and they are absolutely right. And we need to include that in our transcendence. And as we move into this world-centric stage, or once we moved into the world-centric stage, we often repressed or denied these core features of the traditional mythic literal stage, of which we need to repair if we're going to be whole. And as we transcend the modernist stage, when we see all the indignities, when we saw all the indignities of, corporate systems run amok in the late stages of capitalism, destroying the environment, and all of this strive drive, and all of this autonomy, and all of this agency put towards making more money, and we started to link progress, we started to think progress was the problem. not understanding that what progress was linked to was the problem. And so we often then transcended into the egalitarian, pluralistic, postmodern stage of development, and we did so by rejecting or denying or repressing any sense of the need to achieve. And we often abandon rational thought or never got it, depending on how the transcendence happened. And the scientific materialistic elements. We hate the world materialism. I hate materialistic reductionistic sciences. But I love objectification, which is the opposite side of the same coin. And so we transcend, and we don't then like objectification. We don't want to measure things. We want to float around. We don't like achievement. We don't like fiscal health. We don't like making money. We don't like taking money, because all of these things we've transcended but not included the healthy versions of, and we end up in here, usually with some combination of damaged epochs below us. And I agree that nobody gets out clean. And it's our job to make that right. And there is a way to peer into that spiral once you have the purpose of the authentic self, once you have the fuel lit up inside of you, once you see the vision of where you have to go. Then, and not until then in this model, do you then say, all right, are there a few tethers here on the launch pad that maybe I can clip and get more velocity? And we clean that whole foundation. Or maybe some blocks out of the launch pad that are going to make it topple over before it gets all the way off of the launch pad. How can I rebuild that launch pad? And that's what we're doing. Because we have to have a healthy foundation to move from green into Epoch 6. And there's technology to do that in here, built into here. And then there is the version that I actually call the shadows. In this section on shadow elements and lower brain loops. Starts with, I mentioned above, a pathological tendency to transcend and negate instead of transcending and including the positive features of previous epochs. The summits will help you reintegrate these enduring positive features to form a healthy foundation as you seek to grow beyond your current life altitude. Does everybody understand that concept? Does anybody not understand that concept? I'm talking about simply the first paragraph. Everybody understands that concept?
Yes.
And so then I want to turn our attention to how specific negations or repressions during the course of a lifetime become shadow elements that hide out in our unconscious and wreak havoc on our lives, arresting our ability to healthily grow into higher life altitudes. Below the conscious threshold, these shadow elements influence our lives and cry out for acknowledgement in very damaging ways. The shadow produces symptoms in mind or body or spirit to get our attention. It cries out as it expresses itself through our negative behaviors, bad habits, addictions, and avoidances. All of this adverse energy expenditure is because something hiding inside of us is cut off from our higher potential. Through my decades of work in personal transformation, I've come to see this shadow element as a huge problem and one that has not been well understood or dealt with. Psychologists have long known that alienation of parts of our psychological being frequently occurred during development. What are not as well known are the biological/physiological elements of this fragmented self-alienation. Please pay attention to this. This is really important. and the kind of understanding you're going to need to take source code meditation in the marketplace, because you're going to walk into a psychiatrist's practice and you're going to look them in the eyes and you're going to say, I can revolutionize your clients. What are not as well known are the biological/physiological elements of this fragmented self-alienation. Alienation and repression occur during development as an outcome of transcending one life altitude for the next without integration of all appropriate aspects of the previous level. In addition, the ability to consciously process and integrate certain key life events and experiences also leads to shadow elements. So I'm providing two different types of often unconscious challenges that are going on. One of them is just generalized inability to integrate enduring features of a whole stage of development. By never getting a healthy version in the first place and then transcending, or by transcending but not bringing the healthy version up with us. The other one is the inability to consciously process and integrate certain key life events and experiences that also lead to shallow elements. This happens when the lower brain attempts to process information or experiences that are beyond its rudimentary survival strategies and fear-based associated consciousness. The lower brain simply cannot adapt to information or experience that is incongruent with its limited repertoire of options. Through the lower brain, we do not have the neurological flexibility to deal with all modern life's demands, complexities, and incongruences. Often what we are exposed to through a lifetime is not effectively dealt with, and undigested experiences become imprinted by the amygdala and hippocampus, our lower mammalian brain, and habituated by the basal ganglia, our lizard brain. Later, as new life experiences come into your lower brain, as it unconsciously does, it is being colored or filtered by this stuck energy. So information and energy comes in from the environment in the form of events, occasions in our history. And there's a certain compatibility within the neurological flexibility and the cognitive bandwidth of the organism to process that information and energy. And all information and information and energy that's coming into us that it has story, that is contextualized, has meaning. And if that meaning cannot be made sense of cognitively, or the energy overload is such that the neurological flexibility cannot metabolize it, either and or both, they're often tied together, then it is not assimilated or dissipated or integrated. It is repressed or hidden and put into a lower brain feedback loop where it is driven below the conscious threshold as a survival mechanism to protect one from psychological trauma or physiological overload, instead of short-circuiting the systems because it can't deal with it, right? If a woman is being raped, the psychological meaning-making matrix is simply not adequate to deal with that experience. We're not designed to handle that experience head on. The cognitive flexibility isn't there to psychologically metabolize it, and it carries an energy, and the physiology isn't flexible enough to physiologically metabolize the energy, and it's rejected. And this can happen throughout life's events, throughout life's histories, through childhood, because life is traumatic. And not everything that happens to us gets well dealt with, and nor do we always have the capacity to deal with it. And it doesn't have to be a large traumatic event. It can be all kinds of ways that the context of the event does not match up with how the world is supposed to be according to the nervous system and the cognitive bandwidth. And if there's a mismatch between the neurological flexibility and the cognitive bandwidth and what's coming in from the environment, if there's a mismatch there, where it can't be pulled in, where meaning can't be created from it, so that it can be dissipated or utilized or metabolized in some way, if that can't happen once the information and energy is in the system, something needs to happen with it. And if we don't have the flexibility to deal with it, then it gets driven. We check out from it. That's a survival mechanism, to check out with it. If it floods into the higher structures of the brain, when we can't create meaning from it and we can't handle the energy, it overloads the system. And so we check out from it. And these events don't always have to be major events. They can be more minor events, and they can be compounding events, and you never know when all of the conditions line up through a lifetime of whose dad said what to whom when, and whose mom told them there wasn't good enough, and what concussion of forces come in from traumas and events, and all the times life didn't go our way. Not go our way meaning life didn't match the meaning making filters. And so what happens to it? Right? Because we're, to use Prigoghine's terminology, we're dissipative structures. If energy comes into the system, it's got to get dissipated or it's got to get utilized. And if we don't have the capacity to dissipate it or utilize it, then we get short-circuited. And a protective mechanism is for the higher centers of the brain to check out from it, because it's not safe, it's not adaptable, and to drive it into holding patterns, into lower brain loops, where that energy is put into these hyper compartmentalized, walled off scenarios. And we all get some of it, because life's traumatic. And life usually brings more at the system than it can just 24/7 a day be able to dissipate or integrate. And short-term survival strategies disconnect us from it, which are brilliant in the short term and horribly damaging in the long term. Because at some point, something's got to be done with it. And so we have, within our technology, once we have the fuel of evolution lit up inside of us, where we say, nothing's going to stop me, I am living this declaration, the view from 50,000 feet to start to put the spiral together, and then we check in with those packets of biopsychoenergy that are stored within the system through a lifetime on the planet, and we're able to, through the technique, through the technology, locate it, understand it, unpack it psychologically, and then open the packet of energy up that it's held in, and bring that into the flowing salutogenesis. And the flowing salutogenesis is a white hot flame of highly evolved energy, and energy is energy. So now we take what we once thought was bad energy and we just threw more wood onto the white hot flame, and it burns hotter and it further energizes the brain. Because that energy cannot maintain itself. It can't hold on once it gets pushed into that salutogenic inner organic technology that wants to devour it and use it and repurpose what we once perceived as negative energy, and to repurpose it into energy for fuel for the higher brain. And that is where our wounds get to become our gifts. And just that one thing, that one thing, that one summit could change the field of psychology and psychiatry if it was really understood and executed. Because what we're doing when that salutogenesis engages, when it starts to engage through the process, it is, what's it doing? It's increasing neurological flexibility. What was the problem with the shadow coming in to begin with? We didn't have enough neurological flexibility. It's creating higher mind. When we introduce the meditation, the mind wakes up. It opens up the conscious and cognitive bandwidth. And what could not be dealt with before can be dealt with within the salutogenic mechanism and within increased neurological and cognitive flexibility. And not only can it be dealt with, but it's just energy. And energy is only good or bad depending on the context. And if the fire's hot enough, and we can unpack it and move it into there, it starts to just add to the salutogenesis. Like throwing another old rotten board onto the white hot flame, it actually makes the old rotten board makes the flame get hotter.